Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is JL Alexander, and myself, along with the awesome women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Omega Rho Omega Chapter, bring you warm greetings this evening. On behalf of the Women's Healthcare Co-Chair, myself, and Dana Mayo, we bring you warm greetings this evening for our phenomenal evening. We're going to give it a couple more seconds. We got a few more people in the waiting room, and then we'll get started in about 1 more minute. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Again, my name is JL Alexander, and myself, along with my awesome Women's Healthcare Co-Chair, Dana Mayo, we bring you warm greetings on behalf of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated Omega Rho Omega Chapter. May is Mental Health Month, and tonight we present to you It Takes a Village, Mental Health and Caring for Our Children. Over the last 14 months or so, we all know our world has experienced some of the scariest times in our world. We have been isolated, withdrawn, witnessed violence, become accustomed to talking through screens like tonight. And believe it or not, this has taken a physical, mental, and even spiritual toll on all of us. But I don't know about you, we may forget sometimes how all of these situations and experiences in our world are also impacting our children, the way they learn, interact, process, think, and develop. Mental health is a hard topic to talk about in the Black community. And with statistics like the ones that we shared over social media in terms of it impacting their health, their behavior in the classroom, it should be a topic we should all be talking about. So we look forward to the discussion tonight of how it will take all of us to make sure our children are taken care of. Without further ado, I want to make brief introductions. Please join me in welcoming our President, Cecilia Huff, and Vice President Sherry Bassfield Tyler. Following their introductions, we will hear from our guest speaker, Ms. Marissa Williams. Her presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, and we will announce the winners of the Science Museum of Virginia tickets. So I am passing it over to our president, President Zora Cecilia Huff.
Well, good evening, everyone. Give me one moment. All right, here we go. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I am excited to welcome you on behalf of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Omega Rho Omega chapter. I am Cecilia Huff, president of the chapter. Omega Rho Omega has the honor of serving Eastern Henrico, New Kent, and Charles City County. We are so happy you are joining us today for this important conversation. It takes a village, mental health, and caring for our children. We have a special guest speaker, Ms. Marissa Williams, who will be sharing extremely helpful information with us. So please participate, ask plenty of questions, and enjoy. Also, continue to follow us on all social media and our website for many more community engaging activities to come. Thank you for joining the Omega Rho Omega chapter today. Next up, we have our Vice President and Program Chairman, Mrs. Sherry Basfield-Tyler.
Good evening. I am so excited and honored to be able to introduce our guest speaker. As you heard earlier, her name is Marissa Williams. She is a certified clinical trauma provider with 12 years of experience providing therapy, advocacy, and support to children, adolescents, and adults. She has experience working with people of a variety of mental and behavioral health needs, to include those experiencing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and adjustment. Marissa works with foster families, parents, and teachers, and other caregivers to assist with understanding behavioral issues. She conducts trauma assessments, provides coaching, therapy, and supports children and families through the process of healing from trauma. Currently, Marissa is a clinical supervisor at the Family Focus Incorporated, where she provides training and support to an integrative team of counselors servicing the Richmond, Virginia area. So next, I would love to turn it over to our guest speaker, Marissa Williams.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you this evening to share some information. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping items to discuss with you all. While this topic is very important, I just want to make sure that you all are aware that this is for educational purposes, and it is not intended to provide skills for you to provide mental health supports to your children or to resolve crisis needs. If you feel that you are triggered by something that we're discussing today, please message Mrs. Dana in the chat and she will connect you with crisis services. Or if you need additional supports or resources to be connected to a licensed mental health professional to get support for your children, please let us know so that we can connect you with appropriate resources. You will also receive an email to the email address that you used to register for the conference today with handouts and information to national resources as well as local resources and other supports that you might find helpful as you work with your children as they're adjusting throughout the pandemic. So with that, I would like to go ahead and welcome you to our presentation today. And we're going to be talking about the village. And it does take a village to make sure that not only our children's mental health needs are met, but their physical needs. And you as parents, that you understand their needs and also how to parent throughout this pandemic, which has been trying for all of us. We do have a couple of objectives that we're going to talk about today, and they're found in the screen right here. I'm going to zoom in so that you guys can see. And just for some people that might have visual needs, the screen might zoom in and zoom out at different points of the presentation. So we're going to discuss the impact that COVID-19 has had on children, parents, and caregivers, because we do have aunts, uncles, grandparents, so forth that are raising children. We're going to identify some symptoms, which are also known as warning signs of trauma, depression, and anxiety. We're going to explore some recommendations for emotional supports while following health and safety guidelines throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we're also going to identify some resources and supports that are available in Henrico, New Kent, Charles City, Greater Richmond area, as well as on the national level. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, as mentioned, but if you do need a question answered that we don't get a chance to answer today, I will do my best to get those answers to you via email. So we are going to start with looking at COVID-19's impact on children and families. A lot of changes came about as we adjusted from stay-at-home orders and other issues that we had to do or measures that we had to follow to put safety in place. So this means our children were learning virtually. We were working from home or trying to figure out childcare while going to work while our children were learning virtually. We had limited access to prior supports, whether that was coaching, whether that was sports, whether it was tutoring, behavioral supports, Boys and Girls Club, after school events, abundance of things that our children might have been involved in, from cheer to music lessons and so forth. We had an adjustment with the potential loss of connection to loved ones. If we're doing family visits and vacations and family reunions and holidays, our children saw a severance in some of those connections and relationships, as well as the decline of physical health and mental health. So this meant some of our appointments that we might have had scheduled for our children, whether it's doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, and things of that nature, were reduced because of COVID and safety procedures. And all of this is going to tie into our further conversation around symptoms and the impact that the pandemic has had on children as they're adjusting and still transitioning as we all are working through the pandemic. Not only did this impact our children, but it also impacts us as caregivers. And our health as caregivers is just as important as the health of our children as we're taking care of them. So some of the things that you might have experienced as a caregiver could be stress from trying to figure it out all on your own. You might be a single parent, you might have to work and didn't have access to childcare. What do all of these changes mean for you? Depression is another one, and that kind of ties into isolation from the stay-at-home orders, being required to stay at home, having limited access to some supports that you might have had prior to. Resources, again, is a big issue for a lot of parents, right? And so you think about, how am I going to pay for this? One of the things I hear all the time is, oh, my children, they're eating 12 times a day. Before, I would send them to school with breakfast and lunch, or give them breakfast, pack their lunch, and they get a snack. Now they're eating the groceries before I can put them up, right? So all of these things kind of tie into how we're supporting our children and what that looks like for our village as we're working together to raise our children. The biggest thing that is important for us to recognize as parents, not only are we grieving, we might be grieving, unfortunately, the loss of someone, a family member, a caregiver, a teacher that we lost because of the pandemic, or someone that might have passed during the pandemic that we couldn't celebrate their life in ways that we have in the past. For children, grief looks a little bit different, but they're grieving some of the things that they're used to, like a normal birthday party. Maybe this year they had to have a drive-in or a Zoom party. So all of these things tie in together. And the key thing about being a parent is that our children are going to feed off of our energy, right? So the things that we're doing, the things that we're feeling, what's on the outside. I don't know if anyone ever said, oh, you wear your heart on your sleeve, right? Well, our children are the key observers of our emotions and how it's impacting us and what that looks like. So in talking about some of the things that have impacted our children, some ways that the changes that you might have noticed, and some of these came up in the questions that a few of you submitted prior to the presentation tonight. Hyperactivity was one, social skills, maybe they're fighting with their siblings, not doing well on virtual school, academic regression, or becoming an academic high flyer. So maybe before the pandemic, grades were but now we're up here, right? And how can that be a sign of an adjustment issue? So looking at all of the things together, from our peer-based relationships to our family dynamics, our physical health and mental health, we're going to dive in a little bit further, and we're going to talk about some of those symptoms and information around what it means to pick up on these signs that your child might need some additional supports. So before we get into specifics about symptoms, I want to share with you some information that was done in a study around this time last year in 2020 by the Child Mind Institute. And the Child Mind Institute is an organization that provides services, training, and education for teachers, pediatricians, and anyone that has a role as a stakeholder in a child's life. So more than 2/3 of parents who sought help since the pandemic started last year witnessed a decline in the emotional well-being, behavior, or physical health of their child. So that means out of everyone that asked help, it's only looking at people that sought help. These are the top categories that were of concern: their emotional well-being, their behaviors, maybe they were aggressive, regressing, or hyperactive, and their physical health had decreased due to limitations with exposure to some of those supports we talked about, such as extracurricular activities. Alongside of that, when we look at the types of services or supports that were requested from the families that sought help, 40% of those parents had concerns around anxiety, while 37% had concerns around depression. From that, the key categories of those that sought help, whether it was most of the time it was going to be telehealth during the pandemic, the problematic behaviors were from aggression with peers, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or other learning challenges. And so what that means for us as parents are things that you guys might be experiencing might be the same as some of the statistics, that we're sharing. And numbers are important because what it does as parents, one, it's validating that you are not alone in this. You are not the only person that's experiencing adjustment issues with your child, as you and your child are trying to figure out what's next and what's going on and what supports might be available. And so we want to talk about the different things that you can do to help. And we're going to go back and look at those symptoms and the percentages, and we're going to tie it all together to figure out what supports and what things you can do as parents when you start noticing some of the things we talked about, like the hyperactivity or the reduction in social skills or adequate behaviors when adjusting. So the key thing that you can do as a parent is to be available. And that's going to look different for everybody because everyone's roles are different, your family's needs are different, and you have to find what works for you. What I did, because I've been working from home most of the pandemic, my son, I have a 6-year-old, and so he would be doing virtual learning while I'm here. We had a code system, just different color index cards. And if he needed to know if he could reach me, he would slide a note under the door. And if I were at a stopping point, I would go and check that note. And if I could come out, I'd slide him a note back. And so he would know what that looked like when it was time for him to come in based upon that boundary we established. And so that is going to be so important along with communication, because if you're communicating with your child and listening, because communication goes both ways. Sometimes we learn more from listening than what we say, right? So you want to remember as a parent, in order for us to have these boundaries in place, we've got to also communicate and discuss the importance of them and understanding where your child is. Picking and choosing your battles. I think I've probably heard this one about 20 times when I was coming up, but it's very important, especially now, because children are adapting, things are changing for them every day, and it's taking a toll on how they're responding to things, which goes back to some of those behaviors that we're going to talk about. Compromising is another one that's going to be really important. And compromise doesn't mean that as a parent, you just give in. But what it does is it teaches your child how to be a little bit more flexible in a time where nothing is certain. By compromising, we're able to still enforce that boundary, but have a little bit of flexibility, not only ourselves, but encourage our children to be flexible as well. It's important to set limits within that compromise, but also understand how compromising requires us to communicate as well as being available, because that child that you're working with might not understand what no means. It's different than saying no and meaning no than saying no, well, okay. That's not a compromise. I said no, and I'm still annoyed that you're still asking me, so I'm going to give in. You can say no. No means no. No, you can't have another popsicle, but you can have an apple or an orange. Which one would you like? That gives your child an option to have choices, and they forget that you said no. They know that you said no, but they move on to different options, and that constant battle of the back and forth will decrease as your child feels like they're still empowered to make choices on their own. How can you tell if your child needs help or support? So here's where we get into some of the symptoms that your child might be experiencing some mental health or behavioral health challenges. You might notice an increase in fidgeting. Is your child fidgeting during times where they weren't before? It's one thing to sit in virtual learning and look at a screen all day and to kind of move around in that chair until you get your next break. But if your child is watching TV and that leg is shaking, their ankles are crossed, or they're moving back and forth, you might notice that your child is rocking to self-soothe. That might be an indication that there's something else going on internally for them. You might notice an increase or a decrease in their appetite. Again, there's something known as boredom snacking. I think we all tend to do that. But if you notice that your child isn't eating enough, or that their weight has dropped, or that they're eating excessive amounts consistently, and it's not just snack foods, but just anything over time, that might be a point to check in with your pediatrician. An increase or a decrease in sleep. Are they napping longer? Are they having a hard time getting up? Are they refusing to wake up? When they wake up, are they extra tired? So all of those, the fidgeting, the decrease in appetite, the sleep changes in the sleep pattern are all signs of depression. They're also signs and symptoms of anxiety. And they also can be symptoms of some of the other things that came up earlier, such as ADHD. Does your child have an interest in normal activities that they were doing prior to, or as they're starting to return back to activities now that things have opened up a little bit, right? So if they were playing soccer before, do they have an interest in re-engaging in that? Do they have some anxiety or fear of catching COVID or being exposed prior to, that first game or that first practice? Hyperactivity is another one, especially with being confined to the house for so long, not being able to go into certain activities that they might have gone to before. Are they bouncing off the walls? Is it hard for you to have them follow a two-step directive? Johnny, please go put your shoes up and then turn the light off. Do they get lost in the path to do that? Are they having night terrors, or do they have a disregard for an established bedtime routine? So if your child is going to bed at 8:30, we brush our teeth, we turn off the lights, and that's what our routine is. And now it's taking maybe 30 minutes longer or 2 hours longer to get to bed. There's something going on there that we might want to evaluate to determine, is it just a regular sleep issue? Are they having a growth spurt? Or is it something that's happening once they're in that room at night going to sleep that's triggering them to think about things that are causing anxiety to have them stay up? Have you noticed a change in hygiene habits? Maybe now they don't want to get dressed. They don't want to brush their teeth. You're having to fight to have them do things that weren't struggles before, making their bed, cleaning their room, picking up after themselves. Now, mind you, we're all home a lot more. So what a clean room looked like before might look a little bit different now when we're home, 70 to 80% of the day. Aggression, is your child acting out? And granted, siblings will fight each other in battle, and some of that's healthy, but aggression becomes a concern when someone's getting hurt more frequently, or you find that as a parent, you're involving yourself a lot more in the reduction of the aggression or the arguments. The bullying between siblings or peer-based issues might also be a concern. Poor grades is another concern that you might have. If your child is normally a higher achiever and all of a sudden takes no interest in virtual learning, or is struggling to focus and get work done, that might be something that you want to reach out to the teacher, as well as any supports that might be established for your child or available for your child at school. Crying spells is the last one that we're going to talk about in this segment, but this one is very important. If your child has said to you, or you notice your child is crying and they cannot tell you why. This is important because most children that, at least in my experience, when I've provided therapy throughout the pandemic, that are unable to tell us why or what's going on is because they don't understand what is going on. When the pandemic hit, children were going to swim lessons, school, play dates, birthday parties, cousin's house, grandma's house, and we took that away from them in one night. Majority of our children came home on a Friday and they were told that, hey, we're going to open school back up in 2 weeks after spring break, and they never went back. For a lot of children, the emotional intelligence, which is the ability to communicate with someone, I'm feeling upset, or I'm frustrated, or to even say, I don't know how I feel, is very challenging. That's a high expectation to have on an adult, let alone a child, to be able to identify that. So some children that are experiencing depression will cry or just say, I'm sad, and they won't be able to tell you why. And that's okay. The key thing is that you notice that they're upset, or they're able to tell you that they're upset. I think my slide froze. Bear with me 1 second. Are you guys able to see the slides? Because I don't see them anymore. I can keep going if you can see them. I just want to make sure you guys see the.
Yes, we can see them. Yes,
Okay.
we can see them, Marissa.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So what do you do if you're noticing some of these behaviors? Some recommendations that will be beneficial. And again, each child is going to be different. Each parent and family dynamics, they're going to look a lot different. So the key thing is for you to figure out what you think is going to be best for your family. Some of the supports that are available would be outpatient counseling. Outpatient counseling for most practices is going to be offered via telehealth, which would be similar to what we're doing now. It would be a Zoom through a secured portal. And what would happen is your child or your family, if you decided to do family counseling, would meet with a provider at the frequency that was deemed necessary. So that can be once a week. It could be once a month. It could be biweekly. It depends on what the need is of your child. And that service is geared towards reducing symptoms that you find might be challenging for your child, but then providing the child and you as the parent with skills to manage those behaviors throughout the week and throughout everyday activities that you're doing with your child and your family. Intensive in-home counseling is a little bit different. That's a service that comes to you. We have continued to provide in-home therapy throughout the pandemic at our agency. And what that means is that a provider would come to your home and treat your child or your family in the environment in which you reside. And what that does require is that your child has to meet certain eligibility criteria. Typically, that's going to be anything that places your child at risk or your family at risk. So if your child is acting out aggressively, if your child has any suicidal thoughts or has made statements of harming themselves or anybody else, the goal of that service is to keep the child and the family member safe in the home. Therapeutic Mentoring is a similar program as a mentor, which is part of that village that we're talking about. So a lot of children prior to COVID might have had a mentor or a coach or a teacher, someone that they looked up to. And this service provides a mentor for your child, but also is facilitated by someone that has a mental health background. So while it might look like, hey, Johnny's mentor's coming over and all they do is play games, during those sessions or during that time that they're together, their goal is to facilitate mentorship while focusing on reducing any mental health or behavioral health symptoms that your child might be exhibiting. Family therapy is very similar to outpatient therapy. Instead of just working with the child, the provider would work with the family unit as a whole. So the siblings, mom, dad, grandma, aunt, whomever is in that household or whoever might benefit from that structured facilitation to reduce some of the needs of your family. Parent coaching is another service, and that service is geared towards parents and training and providing supports to assist you with building skills to reduce those symptoms on your own or to redirect during challenging times. These services can also be supported in different ways through or a combination. So you might find outpatient counseling and in-home might be beneficial, or a combination of the other services. Places that you might want to also consider that are locally, at least in the greater Richmond area, would be any of your local CSBs, which would be your community services boards. And that information for those localities will be sent to you in the resources guide. Family Focus, which is the agency that I work with, we do provide all of the services and more, not just for children, but for adults and families as well. And the last resource that I want to connect you guys with, which is a national organization, but there is a location here in Richmond, is called Partners in Parenting. And Partners in Parenting not only provides mental health support, they do parent training and education as well as groups, and they have a wonderful resource guide of supports that are available in the community. So whether it's a mental health agency or if it's different supports that you might find through the CSB, there are tons of things that you might want to try to help your child get acclimated through the transition. One of the other things that is going to be helpful are some of the things that your children might have been exposed to or involved in prior to the pandemic. And these are some of the things that I've mentioned prior to around different things that they might have been engaged in and what that looks like now that we're in the pandemic. So consider some things that would benefit your child, whether it's social engagement, even if you have to do it virtually, whether that's Zoom or Google Meet, Facebook Messenger, but just be mindful of how much time your child is spending on screens, because screens can also be problematic when we're looking at the child's overall development, ability to cope, and utilization of those communication skills. So it's going to be very important that as a parent, you're observant, you're available, and you're there for your child, right? And so you're looking at what's happening on their day-to-day routines, you're looking at small changes, and you're picking up on things that you might want to question and have that conversation with your child. Ask them, how are you feeling today? Red light, green light is another thing. Red light, hey, I'm kind of off. I don't know how I'm feeling today, Mom. Green light, I'm ready to go. I'm feeling good. There are lots of different things that come from that educational piece, and the roles that our coaches and our faith-based leaders and our mentors and youth groups and teachers play in our children's lives are going to be so important. I encourage you to check in with the people that are involved in your children's lives. How do you think Marissa's doing? What have you noticed? And get that feedback from them so that you guys can work together collaboratively to find out or figure out if any other supports might be beneficial to help your children as they're transitioning. Thank you for allowing me to give you guys information. I know that it was a lot in such a short amount of time, but I want to make sure that we do have time to answer questions that might have been submitted. We did get some before. Dana, I'm not sure if you got any throughout the presentation, but I'm more than happy to go with the ones that have been submitted first, and then I can come back and check in if we don't have any more that are waiting to be answered.
Okay, we do not have any yet, but please feel free to put questions in the chat. So Marissa, you can go ahead with the questions that were submitted.
Okay, so one question that I received was, when is it going to be okay to go out and venture out and do things, and what does that look like? I encourage you all to consult with your child's pediatrician, as well as following the guidelines that the CDC and the World Health Organization have put out, and always wear your mask. Individually, that is going to vary based upon your family's needs, and what you're comfortable with. Take into consideration any pre-existing health needs that anyone in your household has, and then determine what you feel comfortable with. For example, in my house, we're back to sports, but we're only doing outdoor sports. So if it rains and the sports are indoors, we're not going. We'll see you next week. That's a decision that we've made. So you have to assess that based upon where you are, where your family is, and what you all are comfortable with. Understand that there is a vaccine. There's 3 vaccines out that you might be able to get based upon where you register. However, we can't say, oh, everyone has to get vaccinated so you can go do this. At least at this point, that has not been the law that has been passed. And again, there's no way for us to guarantee that everyone is COVID-free. So please do what's best for your family and follow individual guidelines or the guidelines that have been established by CDC, and check in with your doctor if you have questions. Another question was about things that children are viewing on electronic devices versus what is age appropriate. One of the resources that will be shared with you is a contract for kiddos that are a little bit older that you can sit down and have a conversation with your child or children and establish some boundaries on the importance of what is important and what is safe and what is okay that's protected. I encourage you all to figure out what types of parental controls are available to you. For example, there are things that you can do on different devices, such as screen time. After you use up these 2 hours today, that's it. or blocking certain websites, certain features. You can do this not only through your device, but also through your internet provider. And so it's important that you check in with whoever it is that you subscribe to internet service with, as well as personalized accounts, whether it's Google or iPhone, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, all of the different things that our children are engaging in. It's also important to understand that no matter how many parental controls that we put in place, our children may find a way to work around it, or might be exposed to it at someone else's house, at school, virtual meetings. We can't control our children in each aspect. What I would encourage you to do is talk to them to determine if it's age appropriate. Some of the other, part to this question was around things that are sexually suggestive in nature. And it's healthy for children at all ages to have questions about sexual organs, body functions, and engagement. I encourage you all to use the proper biological terms for body parts and discuss boundaries and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Is it okay to say, well, no, you can't watch her, doing this on that video? I'm not saying you have to tell your children why or why not they can't do something, but it is important that they understand the boundary that you've established around that rule. So you can say, no, this is important for us to not look at this because this is made for, and for my child, I use, hey, this says 14 plus. How old are you? And that's all the conversation, right? But again, kids are going to explore. What you don't want to do is make them feel like exploring things, whether it's via electronic platform or in person, a book, a magazine. You don't want them to feel like sexuality is something bad and shamed. So you want to be very careful with how you have that conversation with them. Again, a lot has changed with the pandemic, and people are sharing things and popping up in videos, and we can't control sometimes what they see in other people's households while they're in virtual school. So you want to make sure that you're having these educational conversations with them, but sometimes not to educate them, but to educate you as a parent, because your children will they'll tell you different things. Well, I saw this and I want to make sure, because I don't know. My son told me the other day, yeah, well, I know where babies come from. And I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, here we go. I made it to 6, right? And I'm thinking he goes, you know what the mom and dad have to do? And I'm in here sweating. I'm like, okay, come on, Bennett, go ahead and tell me. He goes, they have to love each other. And then they pray to God, and that's where the baby's going to come from. And I'm like, I got another year maybe, right? But we don't always know that that's the answer. Sometimes it's going to be where it is. And I work with children that might have been sexually abused, that might have caused that interest to arise a little bit earlier than some of the other children that might be just exploring, which is normal. So just be mindful of not always leading with the educational piece, but ask questions and inquire. And kids say some funny things, but sometimes those funny things or the comedy that they add to that conversation is to hide the fact that they are uncomfortable and that they do want to have that conversation with you about it. So please, please, please listen to your kids, because they have a lot to say. And sometimes it's not verbal. It comes out in other ways. The other question that I have was about aggressive behavior in ADHD. So this is 2 separate questions, but the answer is very similar. So I'm kind of going to tie them in together for the purpose of time. Hyperactivity, not being interested, and bouncing all around. Right? Most people will say, oh, well, my child has ADHD or my child has ADD. Hyperactivity is also an inattentiveness, as well as being aggressive, are also signs of PTSD. So you want to make sure when you're saying that you see these behaviors, the key thing that I would say would be to write them down. If you don't write them down, just reflect upon it. So if you notice that your child has a behavior and you're getting to the point where you're redirecting your child 2 to 3 times per day for the same thing, or you find that you are struggling with getting your child to follow directives because they're bouncing around and moving about how much time do you think that takes? Because if you go into a provider or you go to get help for whatever problematic behavior that you see, we're going to want to know, well, how often does it happen? Okay, well, he's hitting his brother. Well, is that, something that's causing the brother harm? Is he damaging property? At what level? So you want to pay attention to those behaviors. So when you do seek help, if you end up seeking help, or you get to the point where someone else is recommending or making a referral for help, that you have what we call a baseline. What does a day-to-day look like for your child? Does that always mean that your child needs medication? No. There are other interventions and options that are available to you. I strongly encourage you to check in with your pediatrician as well as a licensed provider to figure out what options would be helpful for you.
Marissa, we do have some questions in the chat. So one of the questions that we have is suggestions on, or what are your suggestions for helping parents of millennials who have been challenged with depression during COVID for millennials?
Okay, and that's a great question. One of the things that I would say is to always remember challenges that you've had as a parent, number one, because your challenges are going to be different than the challenges that your child had. But the one thing that you want to do is try to find one way to relate. At some point in all of our lives, we've been depressed, whether it was an adjustment, a period of adjustment that had some depressive symptoms, whether we were grieving or we were transitioning. And so the key thing, especially when you have, and as you know, millennials who are parents are adjusting, we came into society, and I'm a millennial, but we came into society with a combination of everything. So we know what dial-up internet is like. We know what no internet is like. We know what it was to stay outside till the street lights came on. We have a myriad of all these different phases and time periods that we're born into. So if anyone is great at adjusting, it's going to be a millennial. The key piece is making sure that your experiences are relatable to children today, because children today, all they care about at this point is TikTok. Some of them, if they're teenagers, getting their nails done, getting their hair done, going out and playing sports and running the streets, right? So for younger kids, it's not a thing. It's not a thing to talk about being depressed. Nah, I'm cool. Or for younger adults. For younger kids, depression is not something that's there. As an adult, we have to check in with ourselves and normalize that it's okay, one, to get mental health supports, to see a therapist. My husband's a licensed psychologist. I work in the field. We both go to therapy, and we go to therapy together. So it's one of those things that as an adult, you have to, as a parent too, you have to lead by example. Your child might not want to talk about how they're feeling, but them knowing that you care enough about yourself to invest in your mental health might make that service or support or the idea of even talking to you about what's going on more of a regular occurrence. I would say the key thing here, and this might be answering another question, because I think I saw one pop up about normalizing talking about mental health or receiving services. But as a parent, we have to lead not only by example, but sometimes we also have to encourage our children to be an example. And so for children, it's not okay to talk to your parents about how you're feeling. That's not something for the teenagers. They're not going to want to talk to you about it. That's one of those things where, oh my gosh, if my friends knew that I talked to you about it, or there's this big disconnect, right? Because you won't understand. You don't know what it's like, but we do. My mom, my grandma, and my great grandma had experiences at some point where they might have felt some way, shape or form, similar to what I might have felt. So I would say encourage your children, and this is an ongoing thing, having conversations about what your childhood was like. Talk about highs and lows. Talk about a time when you might have been hurt by your parents. And this is important as a parent because we hurt our children. And so by saying sorry, that's the one thing that I make sure that I can do at any given point. Being frustrated and overwhelmed with figuring things out, it allows you to bridge that gap and connect with your child on a different level. For them to know, what, my mom yelled at me and she just turned around and came back and said she's sorry, that she's overwhelmed, or that she's just having a moment. That is going to be a critical point in your relationship. And I promise your child will capitalize on that, and it'll allow them to feel comfortable to open up to you about more and more things that they are experiencing.
Well, Marissa, that's a great segue, because one of the questions that we have is, how do you determine who your child should go to for therapy or counseling? How do you make that determination?
That is a very good question. And what I always say is follow your child's lead once you get to an appointment. But some of the things that you can do to start to figure out who to make an appointment with or what agency to go with would be to look at their website. Right? And in a world where we connect so much on social media, check out their Facebook page, check out their Instagram page, figure out what what services and supports that they provide. And then also a lot of providers have bios up on their websites now, or videos, because things are being done virtually, where you can click a link in and get a snippet of someone's background. Talk to your children's parents, your pediatrician, and get referrals and supports, recommendations from those that are already in your child's life. I guarantee you, the pediatrician or the guidance counselor at school or a football coach or someone at your faith-based organization knows a therapist or knows somebody in the field that might be able to connect you. You can always check in with your local CSB, which would be your community services board, and they will also be able to help you. Beyond that, once your child is established with somebody, after, the first couple of sessions might be rough. They might not want to do therapy. They don't want to have to talk to anybody. I sit in class all day and now you want me to get on the screen. But the key thing would be to make sure that your provider that's working with your child has the ability to meet your child where they are. Person-centered treatment for a child is going to be very important. And what that means is that I'm following your child's lead. So if your child comes in, and I work with teens a lot as well as young children, sometimes it might be looking like we just playing with monster trucks today. But I spent 3 weeks playing with monster trucks, and I was able to figure out that one of these monster trucks was grandpa, and grandpa did something that wasn't so nice. So just be aware of that going in as a parent, that some of the way that providers are going to connect with your child might not seem like they're just opening it up right away, and it will take time. If it doesn't work, switch to another provider. You have that right to switch to what is going to work for you. And sometimes it might take a while. It might not be a fit right away, but just as you would, continue to find a doctor, if you went with the provider and it wasn't a good fit, I encourage you to always, always, always either seek a second opinion or make sure that you are following up with the provider that, one, your child is comfortable talking with and you feel like is going to do what's in the best interest for your child.
Okay. Another question is it appropriate to track your kids' cell phones at all times? Now, keep in mind, this question is coming from a parent that has a 19 and 17-year-old.
So this is a multi-layered question. And I'm going to give you a clinical answer that I would give for a clinical setting, and I'm going to give you a parenting answer that I would give if this were a parent coaching session. So I'm going to give you both answers. Yes and no. For all parents that are on this call that might have children at different levels, yes, it is okay, because your children, various ages, you want to know what they're doing and where they're going. I track my son right now. I know where he is. I can look at my phone. I can see where he's at, right? He's 6, so that's what is appropriate for us. Once your children get into older ages and different developmental levels, it's important that your parenting style matches the developmental level of that child. Once you hit puberty and then you're starting to transition into adulthood, you want to make sure that there are boundaries in place where you are growing with your child. And when I say growing, your child is growing and getting a little more freedom, and you're reducing the amount of control that you're having on certain aspects because that relationship is solid, that foundation and that trust is there, and those boundaries are well defined. That ideally would start at a younger age so that those boundaries can shift and become a little fluid and more relaxed as your child ages. But once you hit 17 and 19, of course, there's going to be a lot of pushback. What that means is that there's a lot of work to be done around the way that the group, and I say the group meaning the parent and the 2 teenagers, the way that you guys are communicating, the way that you're processing, and the way that you guys are making decisions. As a parent, you do make decisions for your children, but at the same time, you cannot be with your child everywhere and do all of the things that they want you to do, and you do all the things that you want them to do. It's not going to work that way. They're not going to do that, and you're not going to do that. So it becomes a constant battle, right? A pull and tug of war. And so what I would encourage you to do is to establish some boundaries and identify the concerns that you have with your teenagers or your young adults, why you do feel like you need to track and monitor their behavior. Once we can find a common ground, maybe we can relax some of those rules. Ideally, again, the boundary setting should happen a little bit earlier, but nothing is ideal right now. And the way that things are changing, we have to, as parents, be able to adapt to all of the situations that arise. Have that conversation with your children. This is why I'm doing this. Help me understand what we can do together so that we can relax the need for me to track or for me to look at what websites you're going on, or to have the find my friends location setting on everywhere. If you're on my phone plan, I'm gonna find you. Okay, so that's that. So that's step one for me in my household. If you're on my phone plan, I'm gonna know where you're at. If you don't want me to pay your phone bill, then you can turn that feature off when you get your own phone bill and pay your own phone plan. But that looks different for every family. But again, it's a bigger conversation around boundaries and limit setting and communication. Maybe the children feel a certain way because you are following their settings or monitoring where they're going and what they're doing. And maybe there are some concerns that you have behind behaviors that they've displayed that have caused you to do that. So have that conversation with your young adults and then figure out what your next steps are.
Okay, and so we have a question about the vaccination. We have a participant who has been vaccinated, but her children have not, and they're 16 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
And she would like for them to get vaccinated, and she's having a hard time supporting their decision. Should she continue to encourage them, or should she respect their decision? I think that kind of piggybacks a little bit on what you just mentioned.
Yes. And the second part to that is, in Virginia, the age of consent is right in that window where we're 16 and 18. So once your kids hit that age group, they're able to make some decisions about their health, regardless of what your input is. I would encourage you to schedule an appointment with their primary care provider or their pediatrician if they're still seeing a pediatrician, because kiddos tend to listen a little bit better when it doesn't come from mommy, daddy, grandma, auntie, uncle. So not to say that your information or your recommendation isn't valid, but rally your troops and get that supportive environment in place so that conversation is coming from different avenues. Not saying that's going to change the decision. I have friends and family members that have decided or opted not to be vaccinated. What that means for me as a parent is that I would be changing some of the rules in my house. I understand that you don't want to be vaccinated. I understand that that is your choice, but this is what the rules are going to be in my house because I need to make sure everyone under my roof is safe. So if your children are playing sports activities and they're going out and they're hanging out with friends and engaging in ways that could potentially cause something to come back to your home because they aren't vaccinated or put them at risk, provide some boundaries around or set some limits around their exposure. Because the purpose of the vaccine was to allow us to reduce the exposure and then also to allow us to reintegrate back into society and have more social interaction. So that might mean limiting some of that, because while your children might have opted to not get vaccinated, we can't control, again, what's happening in someone else's household, at school, or in these other environments that they might frequent. So what does that look like when they're in your home? Are there friends that are coming over that are vaccinated? Have that conversation with them. You can make that decision, but for every choice you make, there is a consequence. And consequences can be positive and negative. I studied for my test, so I got a 100. I didn't get vaccinated, so I'm limited in what friends that can come over to the house. Not saying that, that might be the perfect answer, but there are limitations in the state of Virginia with the age of consent around medical choice. I'm not saying that everyone needs to get vaccinated. I'm not saying that everyone shouldn't. I'm saying that it's an individual choice, but pull in your primary care provider, your PCP, and have those conversations. Schedule that appointment and have the doctor talk to your child about it. Show them some information. Ask them, maybe it's fear. Maybe they're anxious about it. I know some of the teenagers that I work with were talking about like the Tuskegee experiments when the vaccine came out. And that was a traumatic, conversation to have in a family. Well, you weren't alive during this, so how do you even know? And then a teenager to say, well, we learned about it in school, but these are my concerns. Validate that fear or that anxiety if that's what the cause is, and figure out ways that you can either reduce some of that anxiety or get some more information from a provider that might help them make a decision.
Okay, and we do have one other question. We have talked about going to counseling and making sure you have the right fit, but Jetty wants to know, how do you kind of just normalize talking about going to counseling with your kids, period, before you even get to that point? How do you just make that normal?
The key thing here would be to start talking about feelings first. Introduce your children to different ways to express themselves, whether that's journaling, watching different videos about feelings, talking about how you feel. you know, mommy's frustrated today, or I had a really stressful day today. I had this big project and I was just so anxious today. How was your day? So start with acknowledging how you feel and having conversations with your children, which would then in turn allow them to feel that it's safe and it's okay to talk about feelings. Ask them when they're upset. Are you, what's going on here? Are you upset? Are you anxious? If they don't have the words to say how they're feeling, give them some choices. There are a lot of games that you guys can you can play, whether it's games that you're playing electronically. I try to break away from screens. So we do things like play Uno, and there's something called Emotions Uno, which relates to zones of regulation, which is a whole nother conversation. But those are things, and Dana, I can send that to you to include in the resources if this person asking the question would like it. But there are different ways that you can expand your child's emotional vocabulary and make them feel that it's safe and okay to talk about their feelings. That would be number one. If they feel that it's okay to talk about how they feel or to acknowledge things that are going on around them, then they would be more willing probably to talk with a therapist. Start out going to sessions with them. You know, or if you have virtual or telehealth services, let them see that you've sought help. And that's one of the things a lot of people feel like, well, I don't have anything going on, so I don't need counseling. I don't need to talk to anybody. Sometimes, you know, you go to therapy because you're doing well and you're happy and you need to figure out what's next. Sometimes it's, you know, depression and other things. But have that conversation with your children and talk to them about how you feel and how they're feeling. And as a family, figure out what next steps are. It's hard to encourage therapy, especially with teenagers. Again, sometimes a younger therapist might be the key, or find out if, you know, there are other things like support groups or group therapy situations that might be helpful for your child first. And then if they need to do individual therapy, that might be an option.
Well, thank you, Marissa. Everything has just been a wealth of information, and we certainly appreciate it. We have about 3 more minutes left in our session. Is there anything else that you want to share with the group?
Yes, I was supposed to tell you guys to look out for this keyword during the presentation, because I do have a $25 gift card for the person who won the repeat word. So since I neglected to do that, I'm still going to do the gift card. I'm going to ask a question, and the 5th person that can respond in the chat will be the winner with the correct answer, will be the winner of the $25 gift card. And so the question is, what is one important thing as a parent that you should be able to say to your child when you've done something wrong? What is one thing as a parent that you can say to your child when you've done something wrong? And I see lots of answers. So Miss Dana, when you get a second, if you can tell me who was the 5th person, and we will get the gift card emailed out to them.
Okay, so the correct answer, Marissa, is it I'm sorry?
It is a version of I'm sorry, yes. Because I think I said I was wrong. I think I said I apologize. And I think I said I'm sorry. So yes, that is the correct answer.
Okay, well, the winner is Sandra Rucker.
Yay! Thank you all for playing.
Congratulations, Sandra Rucker. And so we do, JL, are you ready to announce our winners for the Science Museum exhibit?
Yep, I'm gonna pull the presentation up now.
Okay. Everyone, if you just give us a few minutes, we are going to announce who won the tickets to the Science Museum of Virginia exhibit.
28 people still on.
You said 20 people?
28 people are still.
How many people still on? If everyone could make sure that your mics are mute, please. Again, we want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We had a phenomenal time. We want to thank Marissa for the awesome presentation and the wealth of information. As we mentioned, everyone who registered for tonight's event was entered into a raffle to win tickets to the Mental Health Mind Matters exhibit at the Science Museum of Virginia. So here are our 4 winners. We have Elena Hernandez out of Quinton, Virginia, Erica Williams in Henrico, Joy Robinson in Richmond, and Tiara Banks in Henrico, Virginia as well. So congrats to you guys. Thank you for being here tonight. We will follow up via email to claim your prize. Before we close out tonight, we want to invite you to join in on our next Omega Row Omega event on Saturday, May 15th. We will have our bi-monthly self-care Saturday challenge. We invite you to share a recipe, cook a healthy meal, and share it on social media for your chance to win a $50 Instacart grocery card for your next shopping trip to Kroger or wherever you head to. So stay tuned to our social media page, Facebook and Instagram, so you can participate this Saturday, May 15th. Again, thank you for everyone who attended this evening. Immediately following the event, you will be emailed a post-event survey that we ask for your feedback so we can continue curating events such as this to serve our community. Marissa will also be sending everyone resources you can use as well, so be on the lookout at your email. And for those who wanted to attend but could not attend tonight, this recording will be available for playback on our social media and YouTube channels. So continue to check out our website at oroaka.com for all upcoming events, ways to support ORO in our community. Thank you again to our guest speaker and all of our guests tonight. Thank you, Marissa. And everyone, please have a great evening and continue to enjoy your Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you.